want to welcome everyone who's viewing. This is Amon Shabazz, and you have Sister Estella. We have the privilege, as part of the Richmond Kwanzaa Collective, of interviewing Dr. Jared Ball, who will be our speaker for our 13th anniversary of our African Heritage Celebration. Greetings, Dr. Ball.
Greetings to you and all your listeners and viewers. I appreciate the privilege is mine. Thank you very much.
Indeed, good brother, indeed. Now, for those of us who may not be familiar with your work, I have the privilege of having watched countless interviews of yours with others, certainly being an avid fan of I Mix What I Like. I'm familiar with the breadth of the topics and the range of your work. Can you just give us a brief synopsis, if you will, of the things that you feel you contribute to our African liberation struggle?
Well, I'll start there. I Mix What I Like is an homage to the work of Steve Biko, who used to do a column called I Write What I Like, where he, looked to raise Black consciousness, political education, and inspire and encourage African unity and revolution. So in the work that coming from academically at least, and in terms of interest in Africana studies background, a media studies background, and being, a lover of hip hop and of the mixtape, we just started adopting it as I Mix What I Like. And because we do multimedia work, the idea was the same thing. How do we use our interests and our capabilities, but in this current context, to do the same thing that Biko was trying to do. So I Mix What I Like is so that's what we do. So I mixwhatilike.org, and I invite people to go there. And I want to say from the top, that's where they'll find, the bulk of the research done on this issue of buying power that I know we're going to talk about. But there they'll also find multimedia, written, audio, mixtapes, interviews, radio, video, all in variation around the Africana world, or at least some radical politics, in an attempt to expand the debate and the conversation as best we can, to inspire the same thing. We still need a revolution. We still need, all the things that Biko was struggling for still need to be struggled for in African communities all around the world. So that's, in a nutshell, what it is. But other than that, I'm just a father, a professor, a husband.
Yes, sir.
That's it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. If I may have the privilege of adding to that list, certainly an African scholar of our times and warrior, I think that it's really important for us to understand the role of carrying on some of the scholarship. We read a lot. Fortunately, some of us read a lot. We get an opportunity to be able to mull over the work of those who have left the blueprints, if you will, for us. But we have people who are carrying on that work like you, and I personally, for one, am greatly appreciative of it.
Well, I appreciate that.
So,
thank you.
As am I.
I'd like to, indeed. So, brother, let's just jump into it since we have limited time with you. So, as you already alluded to, you will be joining us for our African Heritage Celebration on the day of Ujamaa. So, I thought that this would be a fitting question to start with. Can you tell us, in your perspective, what does the African community need to know in order to truly implement Ujamaa as a principle?
Well, first, I guess the first thing I would say is I almost want to say that it's not an issue of what we need to know. It's an issue of how we're going to organize around what we already know. And I think that, to me, is the biggest issue, that if we're going to talk about sovereignty in any form, in big picture, or all the steps needed to be taken to achieve sovereignty, I think we have the information, at least the basis of the information. I mean, obviously everything can be expanded upon and we never know enough, but the arguments have all been made. The studies have been produced. The analyses have been produced. There are still some debates to have, obviously, within the African community, but those debates just need to happen. But the biggest issue for me is that we're not properly organized around any of these principles or any of the wisdom that has been accumulated and passed down to us. And that's, for me, the primary issue, that we have to find ways to manifest in a material sense a political unity around these concepts. So anyway, that would be my short answer to that question.
Understood. Ursula, do you want to add anything with that?
Yeah, I would like to follow up. Did you have any, I know you, Iman and I were talking, you mostly talk about the source of things, but do you have any solutions for how we can do that, in your opinion?
That's my quick answer is no. I mean, and that's always one of the first things that comes up, and one of the first things that is offered as a critique of arguments I and others put forward, that we don't have a singular, organized, or succinct solution. Now, I mean, obviously, I could offer up the big macro theoretical solutions. I mean, if we, as Dr. Clark used to argue, if African people agree to do anything, good or bad, it will impact the world. But the problem is, again, we're not doing anything on an organized basis. So my first thing is, I think that we do need more political education. We need more organized discussions and debates offline, off the record, without phones and technology in the room. And then we need to have organizations put together around these discussions, where people are accountable to everyone, where people are accountable to the ideas that are being discussed, and that there would be ways to then practically implement them and develop the solutions, practically speaking, that we would need to develop. One of the problems that I have, and this is connected to what we're going to talk about a little today, is that because we don't properly understand the situation, and because those of us who I would argue do properly understand it are not properly organized around that understanding, we struggle to come up with any viable solution. So I could say, we definitely need to develop collective economics. We definitely need a political party. I think we need, to borrow the triumvirate of George Jackson, a political party, a secret army, and an organized media press network that would popularize even the concept or the idea of revolutionary activity. Okay. Beyond that, we need to learn more about our African histories, our cultures, how to update them and make them applicable in the context that we're in now. And then we need to be ready for some conflict and some struggle and some difficulty, which obviously to a certain extent we should be used to, given the situation we find ourselves in now. But beyond that, I don't like when I often see other people in these kinds of discussions say they have the solution. I usually cringe a little bit, because I feel like that's either arrogant or often based on a misunderstanding of the actual situation. The only solutions that we will have will be born from collective political struggle, debate, and education. And in those spaces, the solutions will come. That said, and I'll stop here, like I already said and started with, the solutions have already been offered up. They have been developed. The analyses from Diop to Foucault, who I'm still catching up to anyone else from any other, Ture and Nkrumah, all these people have put together solutions. We just haven't organized ourselves around those ideas sufficiently to implement them.
So, brother, you said a couple of things that make me want to go in different directions. So, if I can, I'm going to come back around, if I can, to what I mentioned to you previously in the email in terms of the buying power point. But based on what you just said, if I can kind of switch positions a little bit, let me ask this. Because you mentioned Nkrumah, you mentioned Ture, and I used to be a part of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Won't take up time trying to talk about that history, but ultimately it was the first time that I engaged, at least in a work studies practice that really was based on trying to train us in it ideologically, really trying to get us in a particular mode of thought that was constant in terms of being revolutionary. And so I want to offer this question, because me and my friends, especially within the collective, we're often talking about how do we continue to survive and exist as revolutionaries in the context of living in this culture. And so the question I'll pose is revolutionary consciousness enough? Is it really all that we need to be revolutionary and conscious in an in the context, excuse me, of living in an anti-African, circumstance. How do we continue to do that and move towards the end of liberation?
One of the reasons why I've always been never a member or an active participant in the AAPRP, but always deeply appreciative of that work, is because of the attempt to put these ideas concretely and materially to the immediate lived experience of African people. And it's difficult. So my short answer again would be no, it's not enough to just have consciousness. And this is what I've taken from at least the I guess, extended study from AAPRP related, output or work is that the consciousness is not enough, because without it being organized around and implemented and politically structured and implemented, the consciousness doesn't change anything materially. There are plenty of us who have a lot of wisdom and consciousness who can't feed ourselves. And people are not starving because they're ignorant. And this, again, connected to what we're going to talk about with buying power, is a big problem that I have with the propaganda that we suffer, which suggests that ignorance alone is what causes inequality. And that's not it. Now, yes, you need education and political education and radical consciousness to develop the organization that would overturn these structures of inequality. So that is part of it. But by in and of itself, it's not enough. And I do think a lot of us have been encouraged to say, well, I'll read a few books, watch some video, and stay in my little circle. And because I understand the situation, or is something I overstand the situation, I'm good. And if you would just get with me, we would be good. And if you would just get to where I am, we would be good. Now, all of us, again, as an example, the three of us are plenty well informed, but we're not organized sufficiently to implement our information to make it meaningful to our broader collective. So it's not enough. And this is always a struggle. And that's the hardest part. And something I've failed in individually is the organizational effort, sustaining organizational work. It's easy to give lectures, to do interviews, to write, to research, to teach, or easier, I should say. But the actual work of building and sustaining radical movements is exhausting, tiring, and requires many more of us to be involved and dedicated to that purpose. So no, again, I try to keep it short, but no, it's not enough to just be
no. Indeed. No, you're fine, brother. You're fine. So let's just do that then, because I think that I certainly concur. My issue then is one where we're about to enter into this Kwanzaa season, and my frustration often comes from the fact that we get to Kwanzaa, and whatever day we have our celebrations, we get excited about that particular day, whether it's on Ujamaa, like ours will be this year, or whatever, day that it falls on. But there's never any even remote momentum to move past that. Once January 1st comes, we're right back into the same, usual daily routine of doing what we do to supply capitalism, doing what we do to, do everything but be ourselves in an organized manner, as you referred to. So ultimately, again, since we are falling on Ujamaa, what I'd like to do is to give you an opportunity first to share your perspective on the research that you've done and the critique that you've presented us in relationship to African buying power. And if you can tie into that, what some of the pitfalls of Ujamaa as it's typically accepted to be, or what it's typically accepted to be, where those things fall.
All right. Well, so, like you said, there's a lot that I would want to say here. One, we always have to get past symbol and performance. So it's easy for me to say, as someone who has not at all ever been caught up in religion or even spirituality to that extent, for good or for bad. I'm just making that as a point to say that there has to be something moved beyond the symbolism or performance of a Kwanzaa or a Christmas or Hanukkah or Eid or whatever religious practice people engage in. There has to be something, or any even the traditional practices that many engage in our communities around the African world. There has to be something that goes beyond the performance of it, that goes back to what we were just saying, that leads to actual organized effort to politically and materially impact our condition. So yes, it's great that many people around the world celebrate Kwanzaa in one form or fashion and are in some form or fashion redirected to these important principles. But at the same time, to the extent that we're not studying and engaged in them around the clock, 24/7, 365, whatever, and we're not organizing ourselves to develop collective economics or to understand what that even means, it becomes too much of just symbol and performance, and people can put on outfits and light candles and say things, and that is nice and important. But if we're talking about changing the lived experience of African people, we have to go somewhere else with that. So I say that to say that, you know, one of the problems with buying power that I have, and that has always been a problem that started my own struggle with it, is that it's often suggested to us, even by well-meaning people, that we have this, now they say it's over $1 trillion in buying power. And if we just redirected it and organized it, we could support Black business, which would support our communities and circulate dollars in our communities. And we would, as the argument goes, upend the inequalities that are imposed on us by capitalism and white supremacy. There are many problems with this. One, the simple fact is there is no $1 trillion that we're just sitting on and spending ignorantly on rims and hair and weed instead of stock or land or investing in Black business. So that's just full stop right there. We don't have that money. Real collective economics, on the one hand, you know, in a sense, and this is why I like the internal colonial model of analysis for African people in this country, because it connects us to this, it without reducing or erasing the particular experiences of Africans in this country or in this hemisphere. It connects us to the imperial processes suffered by our people around the globe. And what I mean by that is, if we understand the relationship of a colony to the mother country, we better understand the relationship of Black America to the United States. So, and we then can understand that on a macro level, when we see countries gain so-called flag independence or have revolutions, be it the Haitian Revolution or the Cuban Revolution, or even in a European context, the Russian Revolution, being that this is the 100th anniversary of that, the first thing we have to notice is all those revolutions suffer primarily because outside forces organize and crush them from outside. Meaning that on an individual basis, and this is why all of those revolutions in their own way understood this, all of those revolutions understood to survive, they have to become international. It can't just be successful in Haiti or Cuba or even in Russia, because we see what happens. Outside forces, 20 other countries invade or blockade or crush, cut off economically, and the economies of those people collapse. And we still see what's happening with Haiti, and we still see what's happening with Cuba. As redistributive as socialist an economy you can have, being cut off from the global economy makes it suffer. Finding itself being the only revolutionary country surrounded by neo-colonies makes it suffer. So in a micro context, we have to understand that about ourselves here, that if we want to ourselves to achieve any level of what we would consider to be equality of freedom or sovereignty, we have to join a pan-African and pan-global struggle and understand, going backwards, what our situation is in relationship, or where we fit economically within the relationship or the economy of this country and globally. So we are a colony. We are meant to be an extractive resource for the wealthy, for the elite, for the mother country, for the white supremacist capitalist elite. So I use hip hop as an example. For years, hip hop produces billions around the globe, but doesn't upend the inequality of the communities that produce it. Why? Because as with everything, with cotton, music, tobacco, coltan, diamonds, whatever, it's extracted from our communities and our land and our resource and our labor, turned into something else, repackaged, sold around the world, and the profits go to the very same colonizers that have put us in this position in the first place. So understanding that relationship, there is no room to develop any more room within Black America than there would be for a Nigeria or a Panama or a Cuba. There is no room for these countries or these colonies or these neo-colonies to develop a kind of true sovereign economic equal space because of their connection to the global economic order and their specific relationship to their former or current colonizers. So again, just back to our specifics, we don't have $1 trillion. This is a myth that has been promoted from the early 1900s by the government and shortly thereafter the evolved marketing or advertising industry. And it's meant to indicate to commercial or corporate sellers what money is available from various pockets of the society to extract. It does not mean, in other words, that black people have $1 trillion and then we can look around and we can say, we could buy land in stock, we could invest in our people, we could improve our schools, we could improve our communities, we could develop relationships with other African communities around the world that strengthens our economic relationship. We could develop industry. We could develop, land and resource. We could do that, but no, we're just so ignorant that we're going to go shopping and buy rims and buy diamonds or jewels or hair or whatever we're blamed on, and just choose to be poor and unequal. That's not what works. The colonial relationship, as it explains, as it is broadly, it is here. We have income, not wealth. So there's an important difference there. We are paid for our labor. And then what we earn, we can then either save, which is not how capitalism works. If you save our money, we don't spend, we kill industry and our own people starve.
Right.
Or we can go shopping for what we have as available for us to buy. In other words, I get a paycheck. I could save it and try to invest in stock, but half of the stock in the country is owned by 1% of the population, so there's no stock to buy. 5 white people in this country have more land than all black people combined. So there's no land to buy or to invest in. I can, however, go to the store and buy a pair of shoes. Or I can go to the store and buy a shirt. Why? Because those are the goods that are made available to me. I can get a loan to buy a car. I might even be able to get a loan to buy a house. But I cannot get a loan, which is what major corporations and private equity groups and other people and business people do. I cannot get a loan to buy Nike or to buy or to develop a competing shoe business, right? Nobody will invest in that with me. Nobody will give me that money to do that. So this is what happens with all of us. We can get small amounts of debt to go shopping for Christmas or whatever and go buy our loved ones a computer. But we cannot take that pool of money, even if we were organized as a 40 million strong collective body of people, and then go buy land and go do something else. And because we cannot do that, there needs to be a myth created and promoted and propelled that says they could have done that, but they're just too ignorant. So that nobody raises the question that says black people are held in poverty as an oppressed nation. No, black people are free and equal just like everybody else they're just too ignorant to achieve anything. And with that myth held in place, with many of our own believing it and promoting it to our own communities, we misunderstand economics, we misunderstand where we are, we misunderstand what our opportunities are, and then we don't build the solutions that we actually need to build.
Right. And with that, I'm glad you made that point most finally, because on the one hand, there are people who I feel are just completely incredible in the first place, so we shouldn't be listening to them. But then we have some of our other eminent scholars who also have supported this line in relationship to, whether it's the $1 trillion or whether it's just the whole thing of reorganizing our spending. And if we did that, we'd be able to get ourselves out of the situation we're in. Why do you think that some of our, what I would consider more credible scholars miss that point, would miss that mark?
That's a really good point and question, because, and this has been a little frustrating, and this has caused me personally a few problems, because people are like, well, who are you to say all these great people are wrong? And they're right to raise that question. Who am I? I mean, I'm nobody better than anybody else. But when you look at the research, unfortunately, it doesn't support the claim. So a lot of people have made this mistake, and I think it's been an honest mistake by misreading the propaganda itself. So going back to the early 1900s and really around the 20s and 30s, where I first started finding these consumer reports being produced by the government, where they're saying Black people are spending this amount of money. You have a lot of well-meaning people going back to even, Malcolm X, Dr. King, a lot of people who really had a great understanding of our situation, but in this one area, I think misunderstood what was being said. Just sort of regurgitate the notion and then pass it down. And nobody cites the numbers. So one of the things that when I started doing this research, I noticed is that everywhere you hear people saying this, from Farrakhan to, as I mentioned, Malcolm and Martin, to many other people today, to Claude Anderson, who's popularly known as offering a version of this, there's never a citation that they can point to that explains where they're getting this information. And when you do finally dig into it, you find that all of this in the modern context is coming from the Selig Center, which is an economic think tank housed in the Bank of America building in Athens, Georgia. And they produce all these reports and I'll invite people to imixwhatilike.org, where they can see in detail how I break down the fraudulent methodology. I don't know if we'll have time to get to that here, but simply put, it's misunderstanding them saying the reports are for businesses. They're not for people to understand their economic situation. They're for businesses to understand, who do you target your advertising to? So it says, right, Black people have been afforded access through loan, through credit card debt, through financing, through limited incomes being aggregated and spent collectively counted as spending. They've been afforded access to this amount of dollars that they can use to spend on your products. They can't use it to spend anywhere else. Then we read it, misunderstand it, and say, if we just took that trillion and spent it here, we could do some things. Now, so I think, one, it's misunderstood from the beginning. So we're misunderstanding the economic data. We're misunderstanding the function of these reports as marketing tools for corporations. And then we're not taking the time to look up the numbers and do the research. Then where I would argue that I've found personally a lot of struggle with trying to engage this discussion is that in an attempt to activate and organize our people to survive and to improve, we offer encouragements that I think are, again, to put it best I can, they're false. They're false encouragements to give false hope so that people don't lose hope and become despondent. So when people often read my work or hear this argument, the first thing I get is, well, what is your solution? And wow, that sounds really negative. You don't count for our agency, and you're saying there's no hope. And on the one hand, I am saying in a capitalist economy, there's no hope for anybody. There's no equality coming. So I am saying that. I am saying give up your hope for the collective good. You might make it, sister might make it, I might make it. Cool. That's all well and good. But if we're talking about the African collective, if we're talking about the community, and broadly speaking, working and oppressed people around the world, then we have to realize that there is no hope in capitalism. The other thing is, so that's the biggest part of it. And then finally, one of the biggest problems is that we have a phony political and punditry class that is imposed on us, that is given a lot of room and an echo chamber all over our commercial and even our alternative media to speak about these issues. And they don't know what they're talking about. They misread the information, they mislead, and even in their well-meaning attempts, offer bad information. So even when I debated the head of the industrial bank here in DC on the issue, I know how bad this sounds when I say this, but he either is lying or doesn't know what he's talking about. And this is a big problem. And this is one of the issues that I keep running into, where I keep saying, and I put it up there, I don't charge for it, I don't make any money from it. It definitely does not help my career to put this argument out, but I ask people to look at it. Look at my research and tell me where I'm wrong. I reach out to trained economists, I reach out to and there is nobody who has ever said the information and the data is wrong. What they don't like are the conclusions I reach about capitalism, about white supremacy, about the endless false hope mirage about circulating Black dollars and Black businesses and investing in Black banks. This is not going to help anybody. In large part, simply putting, I'll stop here, because we don't have any money. So even circulating what we have will not help and overturn the poverty that we face. We are poor, to put it as Kwame Ture used to put it, because they have all the money. And if you want to get rid of poverty, give us some money or make the cost for access to what we need to survive go away. But they don't want to do that because capitalism and white supremacy requires the conditions that we suffer. So that's, I hope I somewhat addressed the question, but that's in, yeah.
Oh no, you definitely addressed it, brother. And so I got the little prompt that tells me we only got a few moments. So what I'm going to do is I want to defer to Sis because I feel like I've monopolized the question. So Sis, by all means.
One, I wanted to say that I absolutely agree and concur with you, Dr. Ball, but I want to go back, kind of follow back to one of the questions, a statement you made about sustaining organization, which again is the best solution that we have and that we need the most in order to do any of like the collective media, the political party, the army, all of that. Is there any way briefly that you can tell us some of the ways that we can make sure that we sustain the organizations that we do have, or how we can come together besides our own issues and problems that we have?
So again,
if I can, before you start, good brother, I just want to point out, I think we got about 5 good minutes.
I see the clock. I actually see the clock. I got the countdown on my screen too. So the first thing I always have to be honest about is all my efforts at this have not worked. It doesn't mean they can't work, but they have not worked. The only thing that I've seen be successful is that people, to the extent historically and even today that they work, is that people who already agree, without trying to convince anyone else, get together offline, off record, and develop some principles about how they want to move forward, who should do the speaking publicly, who should cover, security and vetting, what the principles are, and build slowly that way. And then publicly, just look for ways to unite with others who are publicly taking positions you can agree with, and then invite off record more communication with those organizations to get more clear on what page we're going to be on and what we want to do, what our end goal is, what we realistically can conceive of happening in our lifetime, and so on, and then develop the plans going forward of how to train young people to be brought up in that system. So how do we expand and strengthen the independent African school system? How do we build new ones? How do we get them? One of my problems, just talking with a good friend of mine about it, how do we extend those into suburban areas where some of us find ourselves disconnected from urban settings where it's easier to find our folks in organized fashion? I don't know. But I think understanding that has to happen more than even these conversations, more than people getting on TV, more than people having the popular blog. That would be a huge step forward if we, particularly in this internet era, people said, I got to get offline more, be less worried about my Twitter followers and more worried about how many people I see face to face and build with. That's the only, Huey Newton and Bobby Seale got together over a traffic light, and it wasn't that what they did was wrong. It's just they were stopped by the most vicious state in the history of humankind. So it's not that we shouldn't recreate what they did and just look at what they did and say, well, they failed, so we shouldn't try to do what they did. It's that we should start with what they did and what was successful, and then go from there in our own context.
Thank you.
Indeed. No, indeed, brother. Definitely concur fully. Brother, I want to, as we wind down on this time, definitely want to say thank you for those of you who will be watching this. Dr. Jared Ball, as we mentioned in the beginning, will be our speaker for our 13th annual African Heritage Celebration with the Richmond Kwanzaa Collective. We will be at the Trinity Family Life Center on the day of Ujamaa, which is December 29th. Starting, doors open at 4 p.m. So by all means, bring yourselves, bring your families. This is, of course, an event that we provide to the community. It is free. By all means, please come and enjoy the fellowship with other Africans within the community. Learn some extraordinary information. You'll be able to get to hear Dr. Ball expound even more on some of the things that he's discussed with us today. And brother, I'll give these last few moments to you. Are there any concluding points that you'd like to share with the people?
No, I just want to support your call for people to come on out and to this event, not just to see me, but to meet the good people who are going to be putting this together and to build, but also to get that good food and those vegan options I'm told are going to be there, and the 2X size clothing that people may be able to pick up, because
Indeed, brother. Indeed.
But yeah, no, and I thank you all for the work and for looping me in and doing what you're doing. You're an inspiration. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much.
And I would just like to add to the community that it's definitely children friendly. Bring your watoto. They have activities. We have awards for them. So it's an all family, all community encompassing event. Hope to see you guys.
Indeed. And with that, I'll say, if that is where we are, I'll say peace to everyone. Thank you all for watching. Thank you again, Dr. Ball. And we look forward. The camera doesn't like me for whatever reason. I see that it's still on the system, which is probably a good thing. But ultimately, we look forward to seeing everybody on the 29th. Thank you all for joining.
All right, peace.